Thanks very much. So one thing you can probably tell straight away is my name's not Santosh. So unfortunately, Santosh had a family emergency, had to go back to India. So I'm now presenting in his stead. So I'm nowhere near the SAP expert that Santosh is, so I'll try and do his talk justice. Luckily enough for me, I have one of my new employees here, Raju. Raju is in his third day with AWS, but has quite a bit of experience in SAP and has just started here in Canberra as an SAP specialist within our solution team. So today we're going to talk about moving SAP workloads into the cloud. Now, why are we talking about moving SAP workloads into the cloud? Mostly because a lot of our customers want to. If we look across the trajectory of all the different workloads that, particularly in the public sector, the customers are looking to move into the cloud, SAP actually ranks up there quite high. I don't know exactly where, but it's right up there within the top 3 or 4 workloads that customers are actually looking to migrate in. What we've done, and we've actually got a long history with SAP. SAP's been a customer of ours right back from 2008, and considering that AWS only started existence in 2006, that's quite a long time that we've been partnered quite heavily together. And as you can see through there, there's been lots and lots of innovation that's gone on in that sort of way. SAP actually became a reseller of ours, selling services on the cloud, so selling cloud services that have AWS backing them, that they then sell out to their customer. It's not listed there, I think it was 2011 was when that happened, so again, quite some time ago. And over time, we've had various things to go. We've been together with them through the HANA journey as they've started bringing HANA out. Probably haven't been quite as up to date, not at the forefront with some of the early bare metal implementations, but as those implementations have gone on, we've become more and more a part of that. Our X series nodes on EC2 actually a lot of the time came about specifically because of some of the infrastructure demands of HANA that we were trying to start bringing across into the infrastructure. So quite a lot of stuff here. I'm going to go through some of the things about just taking basic apps, basic databases, basic maybe even ERP, those sort of technologies and how we get them from an on-premises environment or from some other sort of ancillary environment and bring them into the cloud. And we'll talk about some techniques that are available depending on what your use case is, what your end state needs to be, and what your tolerance for downtime is, various ways that you can do that. We're also going to look at how we can start integrating SAP with some of the other services we have in AWS. There's a lot of integration points. I'll show you one slide that will just show you just how many integration points there are. But one that we're seeing quite a lot initially is in IoT integration, and also with some of the automation services that we've got, how we integrate SAP operations with some of those automation services. The 2 of the very large integration points we see, so I'm wanting to touch on that a little bit as well. It's also interesting that SAP is a customer of ours, so there's a few things. The most popular one here in Australia, of course, is Concur. Just about everyone does their corporate travel on Concur nowadays. I know I do. A lot of these SaaS platforms that they run actually run on AWS, so that's a different way that we look at it as well. So we've got this concept that we talk about quite a lot in AWS, which is this concept of a one-way door versus a two-way door. I can see a couple of familiar faces that were here and might have been in my culture of innovation discussion earlier. But for those of you that weren't here before, the concept of a one-way door versus a two-way door is a decision that can be easily changed or cannot be easily changed. So a two-way door is the sort of similar. You walk, just say you walk from your lounge room through into the kitchen, through your door, and the door closes behind you. You go, I can't remember why I was here. You can just turn around and walk back out again. So it's a decision. Two-way door is a decision that once you've made it, you can easily unmake it or change it. A one-way door is that sort of decision where there's a little bit more at stake if you go through that door. And the fire door at the top of a 50-story building is a classic example of that. If you accidentally walk through the fire door and it closes behind you, all you've got is 50 flights of stairs to walk down to get out. You don't really have an option to go back through that door. Now, this is very important when it comes to risk analysis. Most decisions we make that involve a large amount of infrastructure, and SAP has traditionally been one of those, are a one-way door scenario. If I go and I size up an SAP implementation, I have to buy a lot of hardware, I have to buy a lot of services, there's a lot of work to get that staying. This is possibly, at best, a 6-month project, probably even a 9-month plus project, just to get that one instance up, running and working, plus a lot of capital investment, which I probably need to amortize across a 3 to 5 year period. That's a one-way door. It's a very big decision. I've got to collect a lot of data. I've got to be very sure about that. One of the benefits that we see and our customers see in going to the cloud is it turns some of these infrastructure one-way doors into two-way door scenario. Because I can immediately build up an environment in the cloud, and it can be an extremely large environment if I need it to be, but I can build that environment, test what I want, and then shut it down, and I stop paying for it straight away. And even then, as more and more of the industry, and SAP has been a very good partner in this regard, as they start introducing licensing models that support that as well, so I don't have to go out and buy a 3-year non-returnable license for 4 terabytes of HANA, I can actually buy HANA as a service as well. I can buy it for a month. I can test it, see if it works for me, and if it doesn't, I can shut it down. If it does, I have the resources there to scale it very quickly. So that's another common pattern we see is we just say, well, let's build it small, but then if I want to resize that, it's just a reboot. I just change the instance type, reboot, something that's bigger. So we're turning those one-way doors into two-way doors. And that's a lot of what's driving a lot of the movement and the adoption of SAP onto AWS. So few quick things we've got. We're going to go into more details on those. We've got the quick starts. I'm going to come back to quick starts in a little bit. These are the guides to say, okay, if I want to put something in SAP, it might be something that I do a lot. Okay, I know how to do that. Maybe I can just do that manually. Or it might be something that requires a lot of effort for me to do. Creating an environment, I need to instantiate a server or instantiate an instance. I need to get an operating system on it. I need to get the application software. I need to get HANA. I need to join all those together. Quite often you find we've got quick starts. We've got guides. It might be a cloud formation script. It might be a code repository. We've got things that can help you get started really quickly. And so they're always quite handy to do. There are ways that we can move from other databases other than HANA into HANA quite quickly. If it's a small environment, we can do it in a matter of hours. And for larger environments, we can do it in a couple of days. I'll actually show you a customer example of doing that. Most of the SAP competency partners that are out there already have skills in AWS. So we can help you. Your existing SAP partner can probably help you. If you don't have the skills to understand both the SAP field and the AWS field, there's a lot of people out there to help you so you can do that. Solution spaces, we've actually got a lot of some of the SAP solutions have actually been launched in the AWS marketplace. So you can actually go into the AWS marketplace, select an SAP solution and pay for it on demand. So that means it might be daily billing, monthly billing, whatever that billing might be, but it's charged per use. And we can put that out there as well. Also, there's some funky stuff we can start doing around. I know some of you have probably, with some of the SAP GUIs, had some problem with how I actually use that outside of, I have to be on my desktop, I have to use it, I don't really have much exposure to it outside of that. There's a way we can actually turn those quite simply just by putting them behind a service we've got called AppStream, that essentially takes that app, turns it into an API-based app, and we can put it into a React website or into some other sort of website, so we can actually advertise it to independent devices, so you can be accessing stuff on mobile phones and that sort of stuff. So there's a few things we can do there. Of course, industry solutions, I won't dwell too much on this. The one that we probably most care about in here is here, and there's government and all that sort of stuff as well. The key point about this is that there's SAP migrations to AWS is a well-trodden path. And we sort of look at the different methods that people commonly use. There's probably a bit of a misnomer. Sort of some of the reasons that people commonly move their SAP environments across, and also some of the ways they move. Now, the ones up the top, we look at some of the reasons why people will do that. So moving to HANA is always a good driver. When you're saying, okay, I want to get an early jump. I don't want to wait till October 2024. I'm going to go now. If you're looking to move to HANA, that's a good use case to do that. When I was talking about that rapid innovation, I want to start launching app servers really quickly so I can launch new apps. So I want to integrate with, I want to create this IoT fleet. I want to grab, I've got doing healthcare, I've got fleet out there. I might have SCADA systems. I want to get that information better into SAP so I can have that a richer data set and make better decisions from. That's a very good use case that we're doing that. You know, tech refreshes are always the thing that comes up and you're saying, okay, well, if I'm going to do a tech refresh, that's the time to jump. Rather than going out and doing that business case for that multi-year investment, I might go to that tech refresh. And cost reductions, which mostly come from right-sizing, from scaling. One of the key advantages we get from moving into the cloud is the ability to dynamically scale. Now, SAP is not the best dynamically scaling app in the world, but it's far from the worst. In that a lot of the different app servers, indeed, we can have fleets of app servers now, so we don't have to have a single app server per use case we want. We can actually scale across multiple app servers. Even HANA, we can resize quite quickly, particularly if we've got multi-mode and DR HANA. We can resize our DR node file over it to resize the production node file back. So there's things we can do so that we can resize to be as close as needed to your demand today at all times and just scale it up as we need to. That's very different from, you know, to putting in a 5-year business case, buying all of the infrastructure for that. I know we as Amazon, prior to AWS becoming a factor, I was talking to a gentleman just before who was telling me about how he sold a large database to us at one point, back in the early days when we were building up our environment. A year in, we looked at it and realised that this is all DEC alpha servers. That shows you how long ago that was. We looked at it and we were 8% utilised. You know, what's great? And so, well, it's 8% utilised because we've sized it for what we think you're going to be in 10 years' time. That's a very large opportunity for cost reduction. I think, I'm sure all of you were in the keynote today. One of the things we can offer, it used to be that we would talk about move fast and be secure. Moving to the cloud would allow you to be as secure as you were, but also move a bit more rapidly. Nowadays, with a lot of the tool sets and the automation we have in our security set, the security that's built into the base level of our hypervisor technology, you can move fast and be more secure than you can be in your existing environment. Just by default, the security controls you get access to, the automation of security, the tracking, the logging that you get access to in AWS is far superior to something that you can build in your own environment. Then resilience and performance. DR can be hard. We can make it simpler for you. You know, just moving you onto a database that has automated DR and DR built in as a service. And then also more of a driver is, you know, you've got some sort of corporate restructure, you've got a merger of departments, or you're splitting departments off because they've decided to divide a ministry between two things, or you're working for a university and they've decided to privatise that research project. Whatever it is, there's lots of paths that cause those corporate restructures to happen. And depending on how you want to move in, whether you're looking to just migrate, whether you're looking to transform, extend, or to actually get better management operations, the tools that we'll talk about today all fit within those and sort of fit those different use cases. So you'll get these slides when you come up. You actually get a better thing of those slides. I can see all my lines down here, but I can't see all my lines on the screen, so that's a bit interesting. And just a couple of customer references just to show that. So we had Oz Minerals, which are, believe it or not, an Australian company called Oz Minerals. They actually, they've done many SAP projects in their time. Their feedback was that the running of their SAP project on AWS was by far the most streamlined, going to time, going to budget, delivering what it said it would in the time it would. And also we had from Visi was another one there. Just their ability to right size and actually scale their environments on demand meant that without having to make a huge outlay of investment in infrastructure, they could reduce the cycle times for a lot of their processes just by scaling up the environment to suit. So let's just look at a few use cases here and a few things. So a typical migration path, we can have, whether you're on AnyDB or whether you're on HANA, if you're on AnyDB, somewhere between now and 2025, as long as SAP doesn't change that goalpost at some point, we want to move on to HANA. So we've got two ways. We can rehost, we can just take our existing database, move it into the cloud. We've got some very good tools to do that, and then at some future point, we're going to migrate that to HANA, probably using the SAP internal tools. Or we could go into another, we could re-platform to a completely different DB. So you might be paying huge amounts of Oracle licenses and getting audited every 6 months and still getting these huge bills from Oracle. And you might say, I don't want to do that anymore. We might say, let's actually migrate that to Postgres in the time being. Then we can cut that whole huge amount of cost out of our infrastructure spend. And then that also potentially gives us a more easy journey to SAP. Or we can just go straight to HANA right off the bat. If you're already on HANA, that becomes a very easy migration path. Maybe we've got to re-platform to a different code base, but that's a fairly simple thing. But how are we going to do those? One of the other things, so there's all these different tools that we use. I'm going to go through a couple of these tools in a little bit of detail. We've only got 45 minutes together today, so I'm not going to be able to do all of them complete justice. But the key thing is, there's not just the tool that'll actually make the database grab that data from where it is, and then reinflate that data where it needs to be. We've also got to physically move that data from where it is, and there's a couple of ways we can do that. Generally, or almost always, we'll either go to S3 or EFS. So EFS is Elastic File System, so that's an NFS share, or S3 is an object base. 99.9% of the time, we're going to use that as a staging ground for one of those transforms, unless we're doing like a database merge. So there's a few ways we can do that. We've got Storage Gateway, which is a device which will sit on the edge in your premises, and it'll just be your local access to your S3 or EFS share, and then it'll stream that data compressed and encrypted in the back end into the AWS Cloud. Also, DataSync does something similar. So DataSync actually looks at not only just getting that data in, but keeping it synchronized. So then as you make changes, it just updates itself. For really big data sets, we've got this thing called Snowball. So Snowball's essentially, it's a ruggedized case. Actually, if you go out on the show floor, in the AWS booth in the middle, there's actually a Snowball edge sitting there, and they've got that up and running. So it's just a bit, sometimes it's got some compute on it as well, but it's got a whole heap of disk drives in it. But when you plug it into your network, it looks to you like an S3 bucket in your chosen region. And you just copy stuff to it, and then you call us up, we come, we pick it up, we put it in, and then we migrate that into your S3 in-region infrastructure. So it's a really good way to move stuff. And if you've got a really, really big amount of data, we'll even get you a snowmobile. Snowmobile is like an 18-wheeler truck with full of disk drives. Excuse me. So we're just to make sure that while we're going to talk about ways that we can transform the data, we can get the data across into a different form or in the same form or whatever it is, we've also got the ways to physically move that as well. So, best practices. What have our existing customers learnt that you can learn from? So some ways, there's the classic way, there's a really, really simple way. We just do an export, copy and re-import. That works quite well. It's really reliable. You can't be accepting transactions while you're doing that. You can export while it's still doing transactions, but while you're transferring and restanding up, you sort of got to stop transactions. So if you've got small applications or applications that you don't mind about downtime, things that aren't used that often, that's a very, very quick, simple, easy way to do a migration. So you can see that. There's different ways we do that. Through the interface, we can use any of those different methods. One of the other re-platform methods, and this is using some SAP tools, of course. You mostly see this if you're trying to merge a couple of applications, rehost an application, or trying to do a resize of the ERP side of the system. Using that, we'll use something like SLO. And we can do that. That uses a staging box as well to help doing that. We just do some migration and do that. That works quite well. You only generally have a couple of hours of downtime, because that's really when you shut down the application on one side and stand the application up on the other side. It typically runs a bit faster than that, but you allow 2 hours for that, and that usually works quite well as well. Rehost, again, what we can have here is this is essentially where we're taking that file system, EFS, we're moving that across, we're doing a backup and restore. Again, this is generally when you're going to move from one database platform to another, so we'll use an EFS file system so we can actually grab that and actually reinflate that into a system. It's a fairly simple a fairly simple method. But what this one does is it gives us this security of the transfer inside. So Snowball gives us something similar because Snowball's encrypted on the Snowball. So if someone was to steal it in transit, there's no way they could actually get to that data unless they've got their key. But this is the same, but an online version where by using data sync, that transfer from your premises into AWS without having a direct connect is all encrypted and it's all protected as part of that. It also gets really good because we can start doing some right sizing in this case as well. We can look at and it doesn't really matter which of these methods we're using, whether we're going from a database to a database, other database to HANA or HANA to HANA. What we can do is we've got some tools that can go in and we can actually grab some of the system utilization. And we've got there's actually a guide note there that's saying, hey, for this set of parameters, this is the size of instance you should use. So you can quite closely match the size of the instance that you use within the cloud to the real environment that you're moving to. And so that gives you the ability to remove or to rehost and resize quite well as we own through there. So rapid migration, so then we're sort of getting into the DMO space here. So DMO, we're using SAP tools here. We can grab our database, convert that to a flat format, and then re-import that inside. So there's a number of methods to move from another database to HANA. Most of our customers have found that this is by far the best way. Customer example of that, we've got Zappos here. They won't let us say how big their size of their database is, but it's pretty big, so it covers, it's within the top 10% size or within the top 15% size of SAP, of databases over there. What they found is that bit over a day, bit over 24 hours was the time it took. The export went quite quick. They were running on Oracle beforehand. Most of the time was in that pre-processing. So within the DMO tool there, they're actually converting it from the Oracle database format into the HANA format, so that once it gets into the cloud, you're just re-inflating directly the HANA format. So that's where that one happens. We do the transfer of that in HANA format. As you can see, it's 3 hours. They had quite a big pipe to do that. And then we just run the import. And for those of you that have ever run this process, that probably tells you about how big the database is. You can probably reverse engineer that. But a real life example, and it worked really well. The amount of man hours, they spent more time planning this than they did executing it. And it ended up being quite a simple process. So one that works quite well. So that's sort of looking at some of the migration methods. We'll go through a couple as we go. But one of the other key things is once you're there is you can start expanding on some of those things. I'll talk about, in the time we've got, I'll try and talk about as many of these as we can. These are sort of some of the use cases I talked about. API exposure and Internet of Things are two of the things that are the most common extension use cases that we see once we start getting into the cloud. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those. We can also add machine learning into this. Machine learning, it's a path that's possible. To date, most people that have been in SAP have just used some of the machine learning functions that are still within SAP. They're quite robust, they're quite fully featured, and they're tuned to work on data within the SAP environment. Where we think we're going to start seeing some exits out of like an SAP machine learning into using some of the other frameworks that might be out there, a TensorFlow or an MXNet Gluon, those sort of things, is once we start getting into the big data and analytics. Once you're starting to, I want to reference that SAP data in place, but I want all of this other data to be in something other than SAP. We can migrate most of that data into SAP and have it all run through SAP, but sometimes it's a better use case, it's a better cost base for you to have that data outside of SAP, particularly if we're starting to look at unstructured data, large data files, video files, some of those large metadata sets, which if we're blobbing them up and pulling them into SAP's control, they can be quite expensive. So apps and APIs, we'll have a bit of a look at what that is. I'll skip through that. A lot of the things we can do is using some of our development tools, some of our API exposure tools So we can have things like AppStream. AppStream sort of will look at an app in a virtualized environment and then transmit that app out through a React website or some sort of agile website out there, so we can do mobile app deployment. It also gives us things we can integrate with some of the other services. So Alexa's one that becomes really popular. We use sort of Alexa as a catch-all term. Realistically, we're meaning some sort of automated voice recognition or some sort of chatbot. I'll try and get to a point where I can show a little bit of a chatbot running as well, and some of the other applications. I'll try and get into some real ones. So exposing this through an API, what we can really do is we can use whatever that data is coming in through. We can come in through API Gateway. API Gateway is a way where we can take a function that's been delivered by something else in your environment. It can be realistically anything, and we can expose that out through an API call. So rather than using whatever the, if you're going in here to get into some sort of data in the SAP application, rather than authenticating straight to that, using whatever port you need to, opening up that port, we can actually have an API at the front end that'll accept that data. We'll use a bit of Lambda code to do the authentication, because you won't always get the authentication correct. We'll use Cognito as the authentication source of record. So that it can either have a user base built into it, or it can be referencing back to SAP or up to some web source. And then we can use that to expose those apps at the back end. This can be really powerful. If we're not necessarily just looking at SAP, we're actually looking at a process we want to run that actually uses other apps as well. So we want to integrate it. We want to grab some data out of SAP, we want to feed it into another app, we want to get that transformed or processed, get an output from that, and then feed that back out to the user. We can build some quite complex APIs or application integration points that happen behind that. So interesting to, a lot of these you'll see in the reference slide that comes at the back of this, you'll see that there's actually some reference cases for this in some ways that we can use that, which you can look at afterwards. IoT, as I said, is a fairly popular one. A lot of customers that are using it and trying to do that. As you'll see, there's a lot that have got either some sort of SCADA integration or some sort of healthcare integration are the top ones, but more and more people are trying to use that. Lots of reasons to use it, but I'll get straight through it. One thing which is a particular use case, which is Lion. So Lion is actually using, is actually a milk company or a dairy company, and they were looking at a whole heap of devices out on the farm that were actually monitoring the action of the milking. So they could monitor they could use some video recognition to monitor the cleanliness of the cows. They could measure the milk volume, the milk quality. I think they could measure A2 versus A1 proteins, all that sort of stuff. And they could derive all this information out of a box that was sitting on the farm. Then they were using an AWS environment to capture, consolidate, and send that data back into their SAP environment. Made a lot of difference for them. So they were spending, getting up towards $750,000 a year on doing this as a manual process. So the automation, there was some sensors that they needed to add, and there was some other costs outside of this. But the cost of the IoT services part of this through AWS was $700 to start and then $500 per annum to run. So the amount of savings they got by automating this process out on the field was huge. And then that device, I don't have a slide on it, but all that information then got fed straight back into their central SAP system and became part of their decision criteria for their reporting and their tracking of what went on back there. As I said, IoT is by far not the only integration point. As you can see, for just about every function within the cloud platform in SAP, there's some ancillary or some correlated AWS services that can help to support that. From machine learning, we can be running Leonardo, fine. But if we want to do that, we want to start exposing it to, maybe it's a particular, a random forest application you want to run that you really think is TensorFlow random forest is the best machine learning, it's the one that suits my needs. I can't do that in Leonardo. I can expose that out to SageMaker. I can expose that data set out to SageMaker. SageMaker can call TensorFlow, import that in, and just through it. For those that don't know, SageMaker is an online Jupyter notebook. that has connections into all the machine learning functions that you might want to run. Really cool thing it does is it automates the deployment of the fleet to run the training algorithm, and can also automate the inference out to wherever that inference needs to run, which might be back in SAP. So if you're running a training model, you're doing a bit of an experimentation on that on a limited data set, and you're going, right, that's really cool, that runs really well, I want to turn that into a production one. Maybe you're running your experimentation on one instance. You say, well, I want to run this across 100 instances because I really want it to be done quickly. You change one number in SageMaker. You change a 1 number of instances into 100 number of instances, and that's it. Obviously, not many people do lots of machine learning there because machine learning people fall off their chairs on that one. That would previously be a month's worth of work, and you'd have to go and buy 100 machines to be able to do that. So it's a pretty significant improvement. IoT is a really good way for the Leonardo interop. One of the reasons being is because what we have the capability to do with the AWS IoT site is to do a lot of things actually at the edge. So IoT Greengrass is an operating environment that we can spit out onto an IoT device. So as long as it's got an Atom processor or something with a little bit of processing power, we can actually we actually send a lot of the things. We can run Lambda functions, we run IoT edge functions. There's a lot of things that we can do out on the edge. So we can actually have a lot of processing out on the edge, use IoT Core to bring it in, and then integrate that straight back into Leonardo IoT. One of the other little cool things we can do is then we can take a lot of the SAP functionality of what it would like to do to data on the edge, and we've actually got IoT edge services for SAP. So some of these business functions that you might define in there. So typical IoT workflow, it's around I'm going to collect the data, I'm going to pre-process it, I'm going to bring it in, and then I'm going to run functions on it to try and work out what it tells me. That function might be I'm going to merge a couple of fields and do a bit of a data transformation. It might be I've got a machine learning inference that I want to run against that data to see if I can do predictive analytics. Could be a few things. With IoT Greengrass, we can actually run those functions out on the edge. So that can actually run on the IoT device itself. So some pretty cool things. I've got another, add something there. And the other thing that the IoT, using our IoT services do, is that we can actually take fleet control of those IoT devices and do things like patches, security updates, and a variety of things on those devices as well. Serverless integration, I think I'll skip that one. We'll go in there. There's a lot of other discussion around also mixing in with some of the DevOps functionality. Pretty much all of our development tools, all of our runtime tools, and a large amount of our operations tools are all out-of-the-box compatible with SAP. So if you're doing runtime, your own little custom routines on top of that, you're doing scripting for app server deployments, all of those we can all have through a CI/CD pipeline through a lot of our tools. We have SDK integration, so a lot of SAP functions actually, SAP modules can actually directly call AWS functions through the SDK being built in. And really, to some extent, irrelevant to your development language. A lot of what, particularly with app server fleets, data lakes, when we're talking about data marts, those typically get deployed. You might deploy a lot of small SAP application functions in containers, whether that be Kubernetes containers or some sort of container as well. We've also got complete integration with a lot of our container management within AWS as well. So you can build those containers, automate those containers, deploy and lifecycle those containers, scale them directly from the system. But a lot of power and a lot of the other, a lot of the insights you can get into your environment that can be hard to get to today is also with some of our operations things. So one of the things we get, CloudWatch is a very powerful tool. Once you're on the AWS environment, every single API call, which is in essence every single thing you do within AWS, is logged. it's logged and it goes to CloudWatch. And you can mine those logs to find, to do forensic analysis of something that's gone wrong. Something's gone wrong, I can use those logs to try and work out, okay, what happened at that time, what caused that, who did it, when did they do it, what machine did they do it from. You can also do machine learning on top of that. We've got machine learning that goes across that, and we can look at aberration detection. Somebody's tried to do something that generally doesn't meet the pattern that we're usually used to. So you can start getting that aberrant behaviour, and we can start getting those, doing that forensic analysis out of the box. Just that's a standard out-of-the-box service it gets from CloudWatch. If you only pay for CloudWatch if you want to store more than one copy or more than 4 days worth of logs. But less than 4 days of logs and only one copy, it's essentially a free service. It just comes as standard, and CloudTrail as well. We've got things like System Manager and Config, where we can look at, are people making changes? We can set guardrails in our environment. So, well, developers, you can do whatever you want within these guardrails. So you can't go outside this region. You can't turn an S3 bucket public. You can't set up a load balancer with these sort of parameters. You can set guardrails and give people a level of freedom but still have protections on them. And things like Systems Manager and Config do that. CloudFormation and OpsWorks we can use for automated deployment. So if you've got a specific app stack that you want to deploy again and again and again, we can build that into CloudFormation so you can essentially press a button or call up a chatbot and deploy that. And then Service Catalog and Trusted Advisor. Service Catalog's more about a controlled way to give access to your developers for different services. So Service Catalog says it's your service catalog. So you take the services you want to consume or you want developers to be able to consume in AWS and you advertise them to the service catalog and your developers can only use those or your admin people can only use those. And then Trusted Advisor looks at your environment and sort of goes, here's things we see. We've got thousands of customers running your app set around the world. This is where you are similar to them in your configuration and how you do things. Here's where you're dissimilar to them. So I can say, okay, we've found that most people will set an environment up in this way. You're somewhat different from that. Is there a reason? It just gives you some insight into where you're at within sort of global best practices. So what we're seeing is we're starting to solve some of these operational problems. It's a phrase that we use quite a lot, is undifferentiated heavy lifting. What's the stuff that your admin people, your developers, your architects, what's the things that they do that need to be done but don't actually provide any value? That's what we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. If we can automate that or take that away and eliminate that, then that means you can spend more time on value-adding tasks. So these are why we take a lot of these automation processes. Also, the ability to do something one time and then just copy-paste. Copy-paste is a great tool, particularly if you're a coder. You can start really taking a pattern that you put somewhere, and rather than having to repeat that pattern yourself, you can just have it, okay, repeat that pattern for me. Take that automation and repeat that pattern for me. And then, of course, we can, as we said, we can start connecting some of those other services. So there's a few quick starts out there. I just want to show you a couple of them just so you know what's out there. So quick starts, they're either a bit of code, a CloudFormation script, something that allows you to get a system built up quite quickly. So we've got a standard HANA quick start, which essentially you can stand up a HANA environment in about 2 hours. It asks you a whole heap of questions about what you want that environment to look like, and then it just builds the whole thing for you. It's really quite quick. We've got a number of versions of that quick start because it's depending on the application, the stack you want to run on top of that HANA. It'll just say, okay, what do you want to run? And it will pre-build a lot of those parameters based on what's the recommended use case for that particular application. These are all available on the web. There's a link to the site where these are in the deck as well. So as we said, we can deploy an S4 environment in under 2 hours. It will by default deploy it in high availability, although you can deploy it in non-high availability if you want. And that's the latest. As of last week, that's the version of HANA and, that we were running that on. So how that deploys, so for example, this is in a single AZ deployment where you've just got all of your environment there for HANA running in there, Bastion host to link into it, and your access to the public. We can then create that in a multi-AZ where we've got a failover server here, and the failover is automated, so we can automate that failover. And then there's also things we can do with, like, say, for example, we're going to run a data hub. I'll just build this out really quickly. So this is where we start using Kubernetes in that sort of place as well. Where we want to be we've got the data hub there. We're trying to just create all of these connections to all these data sets so we can put that up into our data lake. We can automate the deployment of all of these. One of the cool things is that these auto-scale. So you can create an auto-scaling group, and I might say, okay, I've got one application server for each of these data sets. If the demand for that, that server grows beyond its capacity, automatically create another one. So you can multi-part that. We can load balancing across the front of that as well. EKS does that, or EC2 if we don't want to use Kubernetes for some reason. We can use other things. Lots of lines being drawn. Excellent. Good to know. Backup stairs 3. Load balancers, I said load balancers. So yeah, the data hub, we can run that through EKS, run all our applications, cloud capabilities. We can then merge that into other data sets as well. Here we've got IoT coming in, and we can start then using some of those, connecting some of those extra services using that data set that we're getting out of the data hub. Show that. I'll skip over this one. I just wanted to try and get something here, something about auto-scaling dynamically. This should hopefully start auto-playing. Might have to press again. So one of the other things we can do, once we start connecting these to some of the API servers, we can start actually doing things like integrating this with a chatbot. So this is actually, it's coming in through Slack, as you can see, but we're using the Lex chatbot. You can see here he's going into calling a Lambda function here, and we can say, okay, we want to run, we need 5 extra app servers today. Let me run those up. We can just talk to the chatbot. So in here, it's saying, you know, add app servers into this cluster. How many to add? If I remember correctly, he dumps out of it, and then goes back in and redoes it again. So you can, you know, if you've made a mistake, you can do that. Or if he does it again. We can just through a chatbot say, add me 1 app server. I've already predefined the launch configurations and what's going to happen when this launches. Type in yes, and all of a sudden that's going to go out and it's actually going to deploy that new app server. You'll see you'll flick across into the EC2 console over here. You'll see refresh or 2, a resize of the screen. You'll see that app server, based on the launch config, is already starting to initialize and starting to run. So just by integration in, it's just taking some of those basic admin tasks that you might have to do, that you might repeatedly have to do time and again, and just automating that a little bit. He'll show the Lambda code. You'll see it's actually quite, if it comes up, it's quite a simple bit of code. Pull it up, come on. Add app server in Python. It calls, it actually has to integrate with a lot of services to do that, so you can see why it's automating a lot of stuff. And you see it's quite a simple bit of code. And that's the service config, the service map that you use to do that. So I'm pretty much running out of time, so that's good because I'm pretty much at the last slide. If you've tapped on, you'll get a copy of this slide deck. So these links will be there. The sample site's really good. There's a lot of samples in there, not just of SAP samples, but on other things. We've got a specific SAP blog. Got any questions? Love to talk to you, but thank you very much for your time.